Yes, this is the same intro from the previous video on sound design, so if you've seen that, you've probably seen this, but we're using it as an example in this video, so I figured a refresher wouldn't hurt.
Have you heard of the Grey Witch?
Who hasn't? Locals have been going on about her since those hikers disappeared last month.
I heard she stays in the forest, floats through the trees looking for people to pick on at night.
No, not at night. She only comes out on foggy days.
Well, why's that?
So you can't see her, but you can still hear her whispering through the mist.
No, you've got it all wrong. She lives in a cabin at the foot of the mountain. She doesn't chase you, she lures you in. You have to go to her.
Well, someone ought to go out there and find her then. See what all the fuss is about, you know?
Pass. I'm good.
Then I guess we'll never know.
Fine by me. So, what other spooky stuff did they talk about out here?
If you've ever been really unnerved by a scene in a horror film, there's a good chance that it actually had more to do with the sound design than with the visuals. Sound has a way of talking to your brain and creating like a feeling or an atmosphere in a way that visuals just can't quite match. So in this video, I want to dive into some techniques that can help you to use sound design to create tone and atmosphere to make the viewer feel a certain way. And I'm going to be using the intro that you just saw as an example and showing you how I use sound design there to create like a spooky, eerie atmosphere, but these techniques can be applied to any kind of atmosphere in any project. And of course, before we get into that, I want to take a brief minute to talk to you about the sponsor of this video, which is of course Epidemic Sound. Epidemic Sound is without a doubt the best place to get sound effects for your videos. It's a seemingly endless library of high quality sound effects that you can use in your projects. Everything from basic sounds like footsteps or wood creaking, branches rustling, to more atmospheric sounds like the ones we're talking about in this video. Drones, whooshes, impacts. And even though it's a massive library with tens and thousands of different sound effects, it's still very easy to use their tagging system and find exactly what you're looking for. So when I'm looking for the perfect sound effects to create this eerie, spooky atmosphere, I can easily sort out by these different kinds of atmospheric sounds like drones and whooshes and impacts, or I can sort just to sound effects that are associated with horror. It's very easy to find the perfect sound effect for whatever you need it for. I've been using Epidemic for a few years now, and they've been my go-to source for all of my sound effects since then, and I cannot recommend them enough. So if you're interested in trying it out for yourself, there's a personal plan and a commercial plan, and you can get a free trial of either one by using the link in the description of this video. All that being said, let's now move on and first talk about planning. So it's important to sit down before you actually get to the sound design process and think all of this through, right? Like write down how you want the viewer to feel and how you're going to use sound to achieve that. So very simple things like what location does this take place in and how are you going to authentically recreate that location, but also more broad questions, right? Like are you emphasizing silence or creating a more noisy, overpowering, chaotic atmosphere? You don't have to come up with anything groundbreaking here. It's just important to do this because with sound design, you really have unlimited options going in. So it's important to sit down and make sure you have an idea of the route you're going to take before you start. But don't worry, I'll shut up about planning now and we can move on to the actual sound design process, starting out with ambience. Ambience is just the background noise from the location or environment your story takes place in, and it tends to kind of sink away into the background and go rather unnoticed. So it's a very good tool for creating an atmosphere or a feeling without calling too much attention to it. So in the intro to this video, there's a hilltop sequence about halfway through, and in that sequence, I've used this kind of creepy howling wind sound effect in the background as the ambience for that location, and that not only aids to that kind of spooky, eerie atmosphere, but also conveys the desolation and remoteness of that location. In the sequence leading up to that, which takes place in a forest, I've taken this audio of kind of birds and insects, just typical forest ambience, but slowed it down in post to make it sound a little more ethereal and mysterious. And that actually brings me to the next technique here, which is to change the speed of your sound effects. I use this technique all the time for just that reason, to create an eerie atmospheric vibe with my sounds, or just to suspend reality a little bit and make it sound a little less natural. So that forest ambience, for example, is slowed down to 60%, which distorts those sounds of birds and insects that we're used to and makes them sound just a little weirder, a little more atmospheric and eerie. Another great technique for easily kind of amplifying a sound effect in post is to try panning some of your sound effects. So if I pan this audio right now, I can easily kind of move over into your left ear, and I can move over into your right ear. And if you're wearing headphones right now, this probably sounds pretty weird. And that's why this is such a useful technique for creating atmosphere, because there's something about panning a sound like just into one ear or just into the other that can create such a strange, intense feeling for the listener. So I use this a few different times in the intro to this video, but probably the most notable example is the creepy whispering sounds. So I've taken that sound and I've panned it to move gradually over to the right ear and then over to the left, and to just keep going back and forth. And that creates this feeling that that sound is just constantly moving around you, moving to different parts of the scene, and it reflects the way the character in the scene is kind of chasing that sound around different parts of the forest, and also just makes it that much creepier. To give you a more subtle example, in the cabin sequence toward the end, I've taken several different like wood creaking sound effects and panned them to different parts of the scene. So you really feel like you're hearing the different walls of this cabin creaking all around you, and once again, it just makes it that much eerier. So we've talked about changing the speed, we've talked about panning your sound effects. Now let's talk about a third and final way that you can easily distort and modify your sounds in post, which is by using filters. And there are a bunch of options here that you can use to distort your sounds in different ways, but there are three that I use all the time. The first is reverb, or basically the amount of echo that you hear in the sound. And this is really important for creating atmosphere because reverb is the way our brains identify certain types of like acoustic environments. So being in a small room versus being in like a massive cathedral or standing on the edge of a canyon. So making sure your sound design reflects the way the sound would actually feel in that environment is essential for immersing the viewer in that environment. Most of the time, I'm using this to convey scale and isolation. So to show how massive the landscape is and how alone the character is in it. I also find myself using the high pass and low pass filters all the time to create different atmosphere in my sound design. And I talked about these in the previous sound design video, so you can go watch that for a little more information on these filters. But just to breeze over it, low pass will cut out the higher frequencies like this, and high pass will cut out the lower frequencies. But let's move on from filters and talk about drones. Not those kinds of drones, but droning ambient sounds. These are long, very abstract soundtracks intended to really just create atmosphere. So Epidemic has an entire category just of drones in their sound effects library, so I'm frequently digging through there looking for new sound effects to use. I didn't actually use any in the intro to this video, but that's because the music itself in this case acts as a drone. So it's a long, kind of abstract soundtrack that really just sets out to create this unnerving atmosphere. And while we're on the topic, this video is about sound design, but I can't neglect to mention that music is actually very important for creating an atmosphere and a feeling for your viewer. Music has a really unique way of connecting with people and creating emotion, and the right track can honestly make or break a scene. And obviously sometimes the right answer for creating an atmosphere in a scene is to not use any music at all, but if you are using music in your films, make sure it's the perfect spot-on track for the vibe you want to create. And this is also a good time to throw out there that while I'm focusing on sound design in these videos, Epidemic does also have a massive library of music tracks that you can use for your videos as well. One final technique that kind of loops into music a bit is rhythm. Having sound design that creates an intentional rhythm in the scene can really pull the viewer in and help create that unique atmosphere. For me, this typically means coordinating some of the more notable sound effects in the edit with notable parts of the music so that the two kind of line up, flow together, and complement each other. And this is something you really have to just get used to and decide how to do based on the music you're using, the sound you're using, the footage you're working with. And it also takes a lot of kind of pre-planning, like making sure while you're editing before the sound design that you know what sounds you're going to be adding in, and making sure you line up the footage in such a way that it can coordinate its sounds with the music. Out of everything we've talked about in this video, this aspect is probably the most nuanced and really just depends entirely on your individual project. Like, there are absolutely no hard and fast rules for this, but just to give you an idea of what I'm talking about, here are a few examples from the intro to this video.
I heard she stays in the forest, floats through the trees looking for people to pick on.
No, you've got it all wrong. She lives in a cabin at the foot of the mountain.
So whether you're creating a horror film or an upbeat client video for Instagram, I hope this video gave you some ideas and techniques for using sound design with intention in your next project. Once again, a big thank you to Epidemic Sound for sponsoring this video. If you want to try out either a personal or commercial plan for yourself, there will be that link in the description that you can use to get 30 days for free. It's a great resource. I use it all the time, as you've seen in this video, and I can't recommend it enough. If you enjoyed this video or learned something new from it, feel free to show your support by leaving a like on the video or sharing it with your friends. And remember that there is a third part of this series coming in a few weeks. So subscribe to make sure you don't miss that, and I'll see you there.